Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in The World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
So glad to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful, Irina. So again, the big news still remains the US-Iran, or should we say it's now Bahrain, Bahrain, Kuwait, and then only a US comes in. What is happening now? Suddenly we thought Bahrain and Kuwait were much more into defensive posturing, and suddenly we find all those attacks coming in.
So the situation has gotten extremely complicated, but essentially, Iran has been attacking those two very small GCC countries repeatedly, and at the same time as these attacks were carried out and Bahrain and Kuwait struck back, Saudi Arabia was engaging with the Houthis. They struck the Hodeidah airport, and the Houthis essentially blocked Bab el Mandeb, creating a second choke point along with the Strait of Hormuz. Essentially, several commercial vessels altered routes or suspended Red Sea transit because of the security situation. All of these operations were coordinated with the US and allied forces during the operation. So while the US did not necessarily take direct part in all of these things, there was coordination to avoid accidental crossfire, to coordinate logistics and intelligence, and to communicate effectively during these operations. So Saudi Arabia increasingly views the Red Sea and the Gulf as one integrated maritime security theater. Iran is now under pressure from not only Israel and the US, but also from several Arab governments, because even tiny Bahrain and Kuwait are now ready to push back at least once in a while when they're forced to do so. But on the other hand, the Houthis have demonstrated their ability to threaten one of the world's most important commercial shipping routes. The global shipping costs and insurance premiums are likely to remain elevated as a consequence. And the regional conflict is increasingly becoming multinational rather than centered solely on Israel and Iran and the US. And we have seen that also US and Saudi Arabia have coordinated strikes against Iran-backed groups and in Iraq, and some Iranians were actually present and were killed in the strikes. And since then, Iran has tried to attack U.S. bases all over the Middle East. U.S. is retaliating. There are rumors that the retaliation will be an escalation of 2 weeks, and with the hope of essentially sending a strong deterrence signal to Iran, because the strikes took part in the middle of a pause, with the Trump administration being relatively ready to return to diplomacy, but Iran had other plans. It has started attacking Gulf states and then U.S. bases.
Absolutely, absolutely. So should we now consider it's an alliance of, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, as well as Israel, and then US, all on the same side on this particular thing, especially Israel and Bahrain and Kuwait, all these people on the same side attacking Iran?
Well, Israel is not currently engaged in active attacks against Iran. Israel is mostly focused on Lebanon at the moment, and also some Gaza and West Bank related counterterrorism operations. So Israel is coordinating with the US with the intelligence and logistics. Prime Minister Netanyahu was visiting with President Trump today, and he shared additional intelligence indicating that Iran has not only not stopped its nuclear program but has relocated enriched uranium to the Pickaxe Mountain facility and essentially is pushing forward with its nuclear program. So Israel currently is focusing on other theaters of what amounts to the same war. But the threat is common to all of them. Iran has been the source of destabilization in the Middle East since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. It has attacked multiple Arab countries. It has engaged in terrorism and proxy infiltration. So it's not just Israel that's under threat from Iran, and it has even expanded its operations globally to Africa, to Latin America, and increasingly even into Europe.
Absolutely. So why Bahrain and Kuwait they strike back now? Why not since February this is all going on? Any particular reason? Any new strategy coming up here, Irina?
Well, in the past, other states have retaliated. UAE has reportedly struck Iran, and in the past, US has used a Bahraini base to attack Iran. But the scale of destruction and the level of attacks on Bahrain and Kuwait have intensified lately. Iran has focused most of its attention on those countries in the past couple of weeks. So I'm guessing that they wanted to send a signal that enough is enough, basically.
Absolutely. So, what does it mean for uh, Iran now? Do you think more escalations will happen now? Now that these people have attacked Iran, Iran will get much more, excuse to reply back.
Yes, after US has started its strikes, Iran has said that they're prepared for everything and they put all of their missiles into a full readiness mode. But we can also calculate that most of the victims are going to be regional actors. They're going to be uh, countries hosting US bases because that has been Iran's strategy all along to try to cause panic, to cause damage, to disrupt flights, to cause massive economic damage to some of these countries, and to cause an economic drain in the region and to weaken the alliance with the United States. The result has been partially successful. At least some of the Gulf states are contemplating paying Iran's tolls rather than engaging in attacks in order for safe passage and to continue to be able to return to normal trade as soon as possible. So essentially, it's a protection racket that Iran is running in the Middle East.
Absolutely. What about Saudi Arabia and the Houthis? What's happening on that end? Was it necessary to attack the Houthis?
Well, Saudi Arabia is now facing a dilemma because now it's facing two choke points. Previously, it has tried to spend several years trying to negotiate with the Houthis. It has attempted a truce with the Houthis. It has even assisted them internally in Yemen via Al Islah and Muslim Brotherhood parties. Even Al Qaeda benefited from that situation. All of these attempted efforts to appease the Houthis and/or Iran have come to naught. Iran was not willing to constrain them. At the same time, Iran has recently brought in advisors, weapons, components into Yemen to help Houthis, and Houthis, for their own part, boasted about assisting Hezbollah and Iran in times of hardships, including during the most recent crisis. So we are seeing that the coordination between Iran and the Houthis is extremely close. That Iran has essentially commanded the Houthis to open a second front and to make life even more difficult for these states. Now, Saudi Arabia, along with some of the others, have been looking for alternative routes, and they even went into debt, basically spending billions on trying to develop other economic corridors as quickly as possible. But there is no real full substitute for Hormuz and Bab el Mandab. Those remain the shortcuts to where those countries need to go to deliver their goods, mainly oil and gas, to their clients. Other alternative routes are either brand new and are still in development, or they are far longer and more difficult.
Absolutely. What about the US and Iran? Is it still, in a state of war, or is it a state of peace, or is it a state of ceasefire? Very fluid situation on that front, Irina.
Well, Trump thought that Iran was ready to go back to diplomacy, and that both countries have essentially been looking for a time to regroup. But the pause was only a couple of days before Iran tried to surprise US by launching those attacks on US bases. There was a leak indicating that the reason Trump decided to return to the negotiation table was due to the pressure from the munitions shortage, that US is running out of the advanced weapons needed for attacks. But given that the latest news is that US is prepared for at least a 2 week escalation, there seems to be no shortage for the immediate foreseeable future. It may be more of a long-term problem down the road.
Absolutely. So, Irina, earlier we talked about that. Is it some strategy for the midterm elections in the US? Midterms are almost here. We are at the end of July. August begins tomorrow, day after tomorrow. How does it look like? It's almost midterms. Is that strategy, if at all that is true, even if it's a speculation, if it looks like, do you think that is much more of the case?
Well, increasingly, I think the situation is out of Trump's control. Whatever he was planning or thought he could do, Iran has its own agency, Iran has its own plans. And in some aspects, Iran's strategy coincides with Trump's objectives, but in other ways, it is also not coordinating with Trump, and it's perfectly willing to undercut Trump at every turn, just as that administration feels that it has reached some sort of a breakthrough that could help them get out of this conflict and claim victory. Iran interrupts and disrupts this posture because Iran too cannot afford to appear weak, cannot appear to be losing, and cannot allow the Trump administration to claim victory because Iran, for its own part, needs to be able to justify everything that's been going on internally, domestically, and to its proxies as well. So it needs to be in the position to claim that it's victorious and the strong of the two. So of the two sides. So a lot of what we're seeing is actually posturing. This is almost a deliberate escalation just to show off that neither side is going to be the last one to the first one to lay down weapons and to give up and to return to the table. It's not clear how much longer or how significant the escalation can continue. We're watching a game of chicken after all. So whoever blinks first loses. And Iran clearly has tried to pull one over the US by lulling them into a sense of complacency and relative calm, and even uh, believing that Iran needs to regroup and needs that pause, but then it has tried to launch an attack.
Absolutely. Let me understand the case, the situation of Pakistan, the curious case of Pakistan. Which side is it now? Is it on the side of US? Is it on the side of Saudi Arabia? I don't know whether it participated in its attacks on Houthis. I thought its jets were there in Saudi Arabia, because now Pakistan, along with China, they are also pushing for renewed regional diplomacy with Iran. What does it all mean? What does Pakistan wants its role for that? And explain in terms of China's position here.
Well, both sides have tried to renew diplomacy, and they were pushing for a 10 days tactical pause to at least regroup and to get breathing room, especially after the Arab Gulf states have suffered a lot of economic damage recently. The Houthi attack has shut down a Saudi oil facility. So all of that is bringing significant economic damage and distress, even if the internal situation remains relatively calm and manageable for now. Um, the Houthis have also attacked several vessels, and the latest is that there was an attack on a U.S. ship, um, in on a U.S. backed tanker in Egypt, which was set on fire, which indicates the increasing distance, the increasing reach of those countries, and of course, Jordan too is being bombarded as well, though mostly the missiles have been successfully intercepted again for the time being. Um, China has a commercial interest in all of this. China does not wish its own tankers to suffer even incidental damage, plus, it creates inconvenience in terms of security. Even if China has special dispensation from Iran to travel freely, there are other concerns, such as Somali pirates now operating opportunistically in the Red Sea, such as the mines that Iran has planted. They're not specifically anti China mines, but they're just there in the water. But that creates navigation difficulties even for China, even with a special protection from Iran. Plus, the generally unstable situation and the threat of incidental escalation or accidental attack by the US or by other actors in the region. It's still a powerful deterrent against commercial activity, and China is losing money. And China also needs an energy flow to avoid uh, internal economic downturn. So for China, it's natural to want to try to get some sort of a calm, certainly favoring Iran rather than the US, but even a pause would be in China's interest because it would give it an opportunity to address its economic interests. For Pakistan, of course, um, some of the calculus is the same, and for similar reasons. Pakistan has a very vigorous trade relationship with Iran. These events are disrupting that, but at the same time, this is an opportunity for Pakistan to show off its diplomatic acumen, to be seen as useful, as successful. Pushing for peace gives it credibility on the international stage. So it's a major opportunity. There's a lot of pressure on Pakistan to perform, to resolve the current escalation, to address regional stability, energy security, economic cooperation. Uh, Also, for Beijing, this stability is necessary to protect Belt and Road investments and to secure uninterrupted energy imports. Pakistan is concerned that the conflict could destabilize its western border, and both countries also want to save Iran. They want Iran to be a functioning regional partner. They're economically dependent on the trade, but they are also interested in Iran's expertise and cooperation on defense matters. Um, they are also seeking to limit exclusive American influence over any eventual settlement through their diplomatic role. And of course, China has continued to present itself as an alternative international mediator this entire time.
Absolutely. So, is peace still in the room, or peace is out of the window for a long, long time? And the world will have to reconcile with whatever state Strait of Hormuz is in right now.
The expectation is that U.S. campaign could last up to 2 weeks. Of course, if there is a sudden diplomatic breakthrough, or if Trump, for whatever reason, changes his mind due to bad PR or due to the munition shortage or some other factor, anything could change at a moment's notice. So, of course, this is a must ca- a caveat that must be announced. But for the time being, we could expect an escalation of about 2 weeks as a message to Iran to not target US forces in the region. But I doubt that that alone will deter Iran from renewed efforts to cause as much damage as possible.
Absolutely. There are reports that, that there is some sort of a difference between Israel and the US. Perhaps a lot of people believe that, uh, Israel was the one who made a situation that, this whole Iran thing had to come up. I don't know whether how much of that is true or untrue. You are watching this very closely. How does US and Israel relation, especially for this particular thing, look like?
So US and Israel are still broadly aligned on preventing Iran from becoming a nuclear and regional military threat, but there are important differences in both objectives, timelines, risk tolerance, and desired end state. So US strategically seeks to degrade Iran's military capabilities while preserving overall regional stability. It wants to keep Gulf shipping lanes open and to prevent a wider regional war. And now it has a new sub goal of liberating, freeing the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el Mandeb. Its US is balancing military operations with broader priorities in Europe and the Indo-Pacific. It's seeking to shift to the Indo-Pacific. It seeks to reassure Gulf allies without being trapped in another endless war, another long Middle Eastern conflict, and it remains open to a negotiated settlement if Iran accepts sufficiently restrictive conditions, at least on paper. Israel, on the other hand, seeks to eliminate Iran's ability to threaten Israel directly or through proxies. It views Iran's nuclear, missile, and proxy networks as one integrated threat, unlike the US, which has treated those threats piecemeal. It places less emphasis on preserving the existing regional balance than on permanently reducing Iran's military power, and it's far more skeptical that diplomacy can produce lasting security. And so far, at least in that respect, Israel has been proven to be correct. Uh, Long-term negotiation seems very far away, even if some tactical temporary pause can be achieved out of necessity.
Absolutely, Irina. Absolutely. Let's see what happens. For the time, let's move on from this particular thing to Ed Miliband, the UK Foreign Secretary, his trip to the first trip to Doha. What does it all mean, and especially in the backdrop of a new government in the UK?
Well, we are seeing that the first trip for the foreign minister was to Doha. I mean, at least in part, it's related to the ongoing conditions in the Middle East. So the fact that the first trip is to the Middle East is not all that surprising. What is a little bit more concerning is that Doha was actually chosen to be the first destination rather than any other actor. Qatar has first of all has very significant investments in the UK. Out of all the Middle Eastern countries, it's probably the first. But secondly, the other concern is that Qatar has essentially uh, aligned with Iran far more than most of the other GCC states, certainly more than Jordan, for instance. Besides, aside from the GCC, out of their other Middle Eastern countries, and Qatar spokesman talking to a Cambridge gathering earlier this earlier last week said that after the war is over, the GCC will be far more dependent economically on Iran than ever before, which indicates that Doha at least sees Iran as a primary economic interlocutor, and Qatar and the Qataris share gas fields with Iran. While Iran is essentially spending its money through Qatar and has become dependent on Qatar to present it internationally where sanctions restrict its activity.
Absolutely. What about the new government now, in terms of how the world should expect them to? Is there anything going to change, or is it just a new face?
Well, so far a lot of the so far there's an expectation that we can expect more defense spending and more energy security concern, probably UK will renew exploration in the North Sea. We don't know how much there is left to explore. There are discussions that there are oil and gas shortages after decades of um, activity, but at the very least, the new government seems to be open to that possibility. It has prioritized Gaza far more than the Starmer administration, but that may also change depending on how things develop with the Board of Peace, with other regional threats, and with the US UK relations. Um, for the time being, there is a clear indication that the UK government recognizes the Gulf's growing importance in global energy markets and international conflict resolution. Um, London appears intent on rebuilding its own influence through diplomacy rather than military leadership alone. I think it will take time for it to rebuild its military capacity to at least be independent enough to secure its own interest. We have seen very recently a Russian ship shoot live ammunition in the vicinity of the British waters. Clearly, UK UK's military, air force, and general standing army will need to be rebuilt almost from scratch before it can seriously compete in military leadership. So it has to, by necessity, to focus on diplomatic efforts. But UK is also seeking to strengthen investment and economic ties, especially with the Gulf countries. We have yet to see whether Birmingham will become closer to China, about the same as his predecessor, or whether he will follow the example of many of his EU counterparts and start distancing himself from China, at least on some issues. That so far is has been it's been too early to tell on that front.
Absolutely, Irina. UK seems to be diplomatically, doing good enough with whoever it wants to be. Doesn't seem to have, that's my personal understanding, seem to have a direct, threat at the moment or animosity at the moment to be really that much concerned about. Or am I wrong? There are players which could be a direct threat to them, and they know it internally, but nothing is seen externally.
Oh, no, there's no shortage of internal and external threats. Russia and Iran have both uh, threatened UK. Russia threatens UK on a daily basis, in large part due to its assistance to Ukraine and to a generally pro secure Europe position. Iran has started threatening UK more recently after the Burnham administration has allowed US as at least some use of UK bases for launching its attacks on Iran. So that drew Iran's ire and has threatened to attack UK targets in addition to American ones. Moreover, IRGC and other Iran aligned criminal groups and organizations inside UK have also attacked targets, mostly Jewish targets, but it could expand its reach very easily as well. So the last some of the last acts by the outgoing Starmer administration before it left office was to designate RGC and some of these other groups under terrorism laws, and essentially aligning with the US and the European Union on that front.
Absolutely, Irina. Moving on from there, let's come to this part of the world, that's India. And recently you saw those protests and the resignation of the education minister. How do you see it all from that side? How is the world, or how was the world looking at this?
So the resignation itself should be viewed as a political concession to uh, contain growing public anger, especially from a youth movement which calls itself the cockroaches. But it's not necessarily an admission that the government policy itself has fundamentally failed. And what's worth noting is that although the protests have begun with education policy related and a scandal related to testing scandal, um, it evolved into broader frustrations over youth unemployment, broader exam administration issues, corruption allegations, and declining confidence in public institutions. Um, the government is trying to reset the narrative by appointing a replacement who would be viewed as more politically acceptable while avoiding major structural reforms, which can be very complicated. And in some cases, I'm not sure if they're possible because youth unemployment is related to the pace of economic changes, not necessarily to some specific policy related to youth or to their job prospects. Meanwhile, the opposition parties are gearing up to portray the resignation as evidence that sustained public pressure can force concessions from the government. Essentially, it's a double edged sword. The youth in India is increasingly educated, which is a good thing, but it's also become a more organized political constituency capable of influencing national politics, including standing up for what it sees as its own interests. And in the meantime, investor confidence in India is unlikely to be affected immediately. But if we see prolonged unrest without, a constructive dialogue with the government and serious changes, that could complicate implementation of education and labor reform, and in turn, that could signal lack of confidence to investors. What we're seeing that is that foreign policy alone cannot carry the day, even in India. The importance of domestic governance issues matters as well, despite the fact that much of the focus has been on expanding India's global diplomatic profile.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's move on from India to Ukraine. What's happening on that part? Zelensky was recently in the US, and this time it seemed to be on a much more stronger footing, with a renewed confidence and everything. Do you think, he will get some more uh, ammunitions and all that to make an end to the war close, much more sooner, especially after their whole, impetus with these drones and robots and everything, and reaching even St. Petersburg?
Well, I think that the end of the war will come. When is a big question, because the latest rumors is that Russia is planning a general mobilization of 500,000 people. Now, all of these people are not necessarily going to be in top shape and prepared for extensive war. They could just be more casualties for slaughter, but nevertheless, such a mass sending of soldiers will prolong the situation. And also Russia entered into agreement with North Korea to send 30 more thousand North Korean soldiers. Again, those soldiers are not necessarily well equipped or trained for such an endeavor, but still that adds to the complexity of the conflict. Still, Ukraine is in a much stronger position than ever previously, and the fact that Zelensky met with Trump to discuss the practical implementation of Trump's promise to co-produce Patriot missiles with Ukraine shows that Ukraine does have the cards. And there's a combination of factors. First, Ukraine's aggressive innovation in key areas which are transforming modern conflicts, not only with Russia but also in the Middle East and even as far as Africa in terms of automated warfare, drone warfare. Second, because US is running into a shortage of interceptors after multiple conflicts, and having a local and much cheaper co-producer and potential innovator would be incredibly helpful. Third, the Pentagon is seeking to imitate many of Ukraine's strategies and to integrate Ukrainian know-how into its own strategy in order to be more efficient and more prepared for the 21st century warfare and defense. So all of these things are pushing Trump to change his own political position towards Ukraine to at least acknowledge its value. And for Ukraine, it puts Ukraine in a much more desirable politically position, and turns it into a global player, not only because it has products and skills that everybody needs due to that innovation, but also because the fact that US is viewing it with more favor makes it much less controversial to support it, and it sort of acknowledges Ukraine's importance as a defense partner on the international stage. So these strikes in St. Petersburg were a sign of Ukraine's growing confidence, but also the fact that it's ready to turn the tables and to go on the offensive very aggressively, including into areas that are commercial and not just purely military. Uh, the local authorities were forced to confront damage, and so did the local civilians who were part of local markets and who have suffered economic losses as a result. For the first time, they are seeing a direct impact of the war on their own territory, and the war can no longer be treated as a special operation because it was now brought to Russia's soil in a very clear manner, and it's no longer isolated to some distant military infrastructure. Either it's affecting everyday lives. This attack represents one of Ukraine's deepest strikes into northwestern Russia so far. Certainly, it demonstrates continued improvements in Ukraine's indigenous long-range strike capability. Russia will likely expand air defense coverage around additional urban centers, but that will also force it to essentially remove that very necessary defense from military structures. Russia's air defenses have proven to be extremely limited overall. There is also a huge psychological significance to this attack because until now, that particular city, the cultural center of Russia, has largely remained outside the war impact. Ukraine is continuing to demonstrate the strategic depth inside Russia is becoming increasingly vulnerable. And of course, Russia retaliated by a huge missile attack against Kiev last night, which Zelensky announced hours before it took place due to the evident preparation of such an attack. Ukraine still needs air defense, and that was part of Zelensky's message to Congress and to the administration when he visited earlier
Absolutely, Irene.
yesterday.
Absolutely, Irina. Our last topic of the day is Marco Rubio. He wants dismantlement of the ICC. What happened there? Why does the US want there? Help us understand for anyone who doesn't know the background.
So essentially, ICC has long been a target of US skepticism due to its arguably political nature and also due to US position that the US Constitution trumps all these international legal institutions and obligations. So while different administrations chose to at times to remain in the ICC and at other times to withdraw from the ICC, overall US tended to be more skeptical than other countries, in part due to the strength of its own internal legal mechanisms, which did not warrant being subject to international jurisdiction, and in part due to the skepticism over the fact that um, judges, prosecutors, and investigators from undemocratic and corrupt countries were part of the ICC and could take part with democratic counterparts. Latest developments have indicated that the US is not altogether against multilateralism when it serves its own interests. For instance, the same Marco Rubio called for greater international cooperation against politically motivated left-wing extremist organizations whom he labeled terrorists, and specifically Antifa, but also assorted others in that ecosystem. And he brought together over 60 countries for a conference to push for a basic agreement on that issue with some success, but of course, it remains to be seen what comes out of this one meeting, whether there's going to be any serious changes in coordination or whether it will remain largely a US posture and symbolism. Um, Rubio also argued that ICC has become so politicized that it should be dismantled or replaced. Um, at nearly the same time, uh, in what appears to not be at all coincidental, the Pakistani prosecutor who was involved in ICC related proceedings, specifically related to Israel officials in Gaza who ordered the arrest warrant against Netanyahu and the former defense minister Yoav Gallant, was removed following allegations of sexual harassment. And also Israel indicated that Qatar was involved in potentially bribing the same prosecutor Khan. So the controversy further damaged the court's reputation during a period that can only be described as controversial. Um, so Rubio is attempting to broaden international counterterrorism beyond the Islamist organizations and far-right extremism, but the ACC controversy provides Washington with additional arguments that institutional reform is necessary. The removal of the prosecutor likewise raises questions about governance and accountability within international legal institutions. US is likely to encourage allies to strengthen alternative legal mechanisms outside the ICC framework, and the debate increasingly concerns the future legitimacy of international institutions as much as any individual investigation. Of course, Ukraine is particularly concerned about all of this because at least 6 high-ranking Russian officials have ICC warrants against them, including Putin himself. So dismantling ICC would undercut Ukraine's legal position in seeing war criminals being at least theoretically brought to justice.
Absolutely, absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The World According to Irina Tsukerman on the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.